We're here to talk about something very important in this country, actually. And before we celebrate the wonderful achievements of Mr. Wade Davis, I've been asked to talk a little bit about this atlas that we are developing as a nation. And I think it's important that we maybe start with a little bit of a story in terms of some of the things that actually brought me in contact with this work. So once upon a time, I finished first year university. I got terrible marks, and I figured I better go see the world a bit. And I was walking along the old trails in Nepal, walking into a place called Namche Bazaar. For those of you that have been there, you'll know it. And was struck with this very powerful question about what happened to our original trails in this country. What happened to the trails that Indigenous peoples, my own peoples, had been walking for millennia? And I didn't have the answer for that right at that particular point in time. So I came back and I went back to university and came to realize that some of those trails are the original waterways of this country. The Churchill River, the Fraser River, the Mackenzie River. But when we understand those waterways through those names, we're not actually understanding what they truly represent. We're not understanding that original connection that those waterways represent to this land, that life that has existed here for so long. So one of the best ways, as we heard about the C3 trip around the country, is to see this country from the water and see it by the rivers and to understand it and begin to see this country not through the roads that we've created, but through the original ways that we walked on this planet. That's what this Indigenous Peoples Atlas is all about, is it's about taking off and lifting off the names that have been imposed upon this land and reaching back and finding the original meaning, the original place names, the original relationships that have existed in this country for so long. And what's really powerful is when we begin to understand this country through a journey of water, we can think about how we used to travel in this land. So we used to travel by canoe. And the canoe actually provides us with a lot of very important teachings in terms of how we need to walk together. A canoe requires two people working in tandem in a tandem boat. We talked earlier about this difficult road that we're walking on, but I actually think of it more as a difficult river of reconciliation that we're trying to run. It's actually full of waves, it's full of pitfalls, it's full of hazards. And it's going to take both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples working together, collectively, collaboratively, as we chart this river. But in that, there's a very fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves. When we think about the roles of the two people that are in that boat, the person in the bow and person in the stern, the person in the bow being the one that identifies the rocks and helps steer the canoe as it comes down, and the person in the stern setting the line, looking at the bigger picture. In this process of reconciliation, I think it's really important that we recognize that it's actually Indigenous peoples in the stern of this canoe as we try to reconcile in this country. And that's what the Royal Canadian Geographical Society has done through this Indigenous Peoples Atlas, is they've empowered Indigenous peoples through the AFN, the Métis National Council, the ITK, and the National Centre to steer the ship down this river, to set the course, to tell the stories that we need to tell so that we can share this with all of Canada. And this is exceptionally serious, what we're talking about in this country. This is probably, if it is, the most important conversation that we're having. Because this relationship, the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, and our ability to reconcile this relationship will be the determining factor in whether or not we're going to figure out how to live respectfully with this land. Because if we look right down at the end of that room there and we see that big Bill Reed canoe, we can recognize that it's not just us in this canoe as people, but it's all of creation. It's all of life. That canoe says that we all need to collectively be pulling together as we paddle this canoe. And right now, we know, being in this room together, that we are not living in a sustainable world. We are not all paddling in the same direction. I'm not even too sure if we're in the same boat half of the time, to tell you the truth. And we've forgotten these original teachings of the land. So when we go back to that first walk that I had in Nepal so many years ago, and we ask ourselves what happened to the original waterways, what the Royal Canadian Geographic Society has done with the partners is help give all of those kids that are coming the opportunity to understand this country for what it is and what it always has been. It is the home of Indigenous peoples that have existed here for millennia. It is the home of all life that has existed here on this country since time immemorial. And there is a fundamental and sacred relationship that we have yet to realize as a country that is right at the heart of this relationship of reconciliation, at the repairing the past damage that's been done, and this opportunity to tell a much more truthful and honest history.